Oh, sorry, I thought I was unmuted. I prefer my POIs in chat. I'll try take one at 5:30. Just let me set my recorder and we'll be good to go. Three parts to my case. Firstly, I'll be analyzing incentives of the US during the Cold War. Secondly, I'll actually just illustrate what the government counterfactual looks like. Thirdly, I'll just be explaining why the government control counterfactual is simply better in terms of security interests and scientific innovation. So two parts of that argument. Firstly, then on what the incentives of the US were at the height of the Cold War. I think there's four pieces of analysis to this. Firstly, I think the US in that time of being was at the height of Cold War, so there's very tense geopolitical arena globally. But two, I think the US at that time was also constantly just terrified of Soviet Union's possible military dominance and the Soviet Union winning the arms race possibly. And the US and the Soviet Union were betting on winning on things like the technological investment and innovation because this meant more economic output for them and being able to obtain things like defense leverages and geopolitical leverages when it came to exerting soft power over really fragile and developing countries, things like Vietnam or things like Korea, for example. Thirdly, the US was engaging in a really intense ideological battle against the Soviet Union. It was a battle between capitalism and communism, which is why the US, for example, intervened in things like in places like Korea and Vietnam. It is why the CIA literally overthrew tons of communist governments, so for example in Indonesia. And the Soviet Union was also just gaining ground in other parts of the world. So for example, in North Korea and parts of Vietnam, which is why the US was intensely just pulling all their resources into being able to win that ideological battle as well. Fourthly and lastly, and then the US wanted to maintain an constant informational asymmetry against the Soviet Union. This is especially true for two reasons. Firstly, the Cold War is established as a height of secrecy between the US and the Soviet Union. The only way to expand their margins of potentially winning the arms race and the Cold War in general was to become more self-reliant, to become more independent, and to become more secret towards themselves. Secondly, the US is interfering with extraterrestrial entities that they do not know anything about. The US knows that they're able to dictate terms and monitor their activities much more easily, especially if the aliens, like the first human contact these aliens would have will be the Americans. Second important in this case, what does the government counterfactual look like? What does the mutual defense pact look like? Three layers. Firstly, it looks like the secret technological sharing between the US and these aliens and these extraterrestrial entities. For example, probably the US will build a space like Area 51, but except instead of like doing all these like shady stuff they're doing right now, they're instead inviting aliens into this very secret base and communicating with them directly. Secondly, it looks like the very diplomatic engagement with these aliens. So for example, the US gives information on the Earth to the aliens. For example, the US will give information to the aliens about how humans work in exchange for information from aliens, like how their climate works, how their technology works, how they obtain certain energy sources and utilize them, what scientific concepts they may know, or how they perceive the universe and their existence. Thirdly, the aliens would simply really just not agree to partner with the Soviet Union. There's two structural reasons for why this would be very likely to happen. Firstly, the US is just simply able to tell the aliens that, hey, the Soviet Union are the bad guys. We are the good guys. We are the peacekeepers who are trying to hold everything together. So your technology and all your information and all your knowledge is in a better hands with us instead of Soviet Union because they will exploit you and kill you or something else. But secondly, this means that even if the Soviet Union finds out about these aliens, the aliens' first instinct towards them is to probably be extremely cautious and secretive. The aliens don't know about humans extensively because the closest source about how humans work and what their psychology is possibly is the Americans who are able to tell them whatever they want. But the argument is very simple. Why is the counterfactual better? First part to this, security interest. Why is the most important consideration? Two reasons. Firstly, the US has very large incentives to be able to leverage their ability in making sure that they are always a step ahead of any geopolitical rival. I think in this case, I think it's especially clear, which is the Soviet Union. Secondly, the US wants to be able to secure a lot of soft power over any other country. This is especially true because the Soviet Union constantly proposes an ideological and economic alternative to fragile developing states, which scares the US extensively. Why do we win on security? I think there's two reasons to this. Firstly, being able to have immediate contact with the with these aliens means that the US immediately has a win over security arsenal because the technology that they're obtaining from these aliens are much more destructive and will literally give the US a head start in any terms of like building up the security and building up the defense strategy. But secondly, the US is actively denying the Soviet Union of having any sort of leverage over them because the aliens have a signed pact with the US. The first mover is advantage by the US. It's extremely important because you're controlling extraterrestrial diplomatic relationships. So even if again the Soviet Union discovers them, you have more ability to convince them that hey, we have this relationship, we built this over a certain period of time. You don't know the Soviet Union at all. Why would you trust them? The impacts are threefold. Firstly, the US can have far more secret leverage over the Soviet Union. They were already beating the Soviet Union in many aspects during the Cold War, things like developing more destructive nukes, developing things like, I don't know, like radar technology and whatnot. But secondly, this is the easiest way for the US to win the Cold War because it gives them incomprehensible technological superiority. Things like having defense systems against any type of nuke that anyone can throw at you, having superior energy sources that can be infinite. But thirdly, the US are able to attain a lot more soft power. Firstly, the US had control over tons of global institutions, things like Bretton Woods, ITC, and UN, that the US wanted to maintain over the long term. But secondly, the US wanted to fight against communism. The US is not as afraid or scared to engage in military combat anymore because it probably has the technology to not only fight back and launch insanely effective offensive attacks, they're also able to protect their own soldiers better because maybe they're able to pay like bulletproof suits for everyone at a cheap price because they got this really cool energy source from the aliens. Before I move on to scientific innovation, I'll take that from CO.
Do you think it's more likely that the US flex about this relationship or maintain it secretly?
I think our expression really just, I think is going to be very secretive, especially if the US incentive was to be able to win the Cold War in the first place. Second part to the speech as to why you actually get more scientific innovation. I think external of the Cold War, the US is a leading actor in the technological innovation during that period of the Cold War. Things like inventing radio, or companies in the US paving way for the internet in the future. The ability for the US to control innovation and soft power over companies and other foreign entities, which means first of all, the US is able to save a lot of trial and error processes of science because you have invaluable technological and scientific knowledge, things like knowing whether other aliens exist in the universe, how to get better communications with extraterrestrial beings. Secondly, I think this bleeds more into civilian infrastructure where technology is packaged in a way that is a natural human development, and you are able to market that to civilians. This is a good gauge of economic dominance, but the US is able to showcase this to the world by hosting their own tech development fairs and creating ads for their creations that the average US civilian is so lucky to access. But thirdly, you have the most information because you literally are able to research into things like extraterrestrial biology, how aliens survive on different planets, how big the universe is. The US evolves in technological and biology and science so drastically that US educational institutions like MIT and Harvard are just able to establish themselves as the ultimate universities, and NASA is the ultimate place that you want to be in when it comes to science at the end of the day. Everyone wants to go to the US. This is the US interest. OG.
Thank that speaker for the wonderful speech. Hello.
Hi. Please do your PIs verbally. I won't be looking at chat also on my phone, so there's no way I can open it. With that said, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The US knows that it has won the Cold War. It has literally just been on the fucking moon. There is no reason to trade off all of the benefits they're currently having just to increase the margin of victory. First point of setup then. What are the incentives of the United States? Notice, the primary incentive of the United States, above that of beating communism in the USSR, is to maintain the maximum amount of political power. 3 reasons why this is true. Firstly, gaining political power as the US, for example, global influence or economic power, is how you maintain your state legitimacy because the US is uniquely reliant on the narrative of US excellence and it being literally the biggest force in the entire world. If you're able to convince your population you're the strongest ever, that is how you maintain your power. Secondly, I think political power just means benefits for the people who are in power and who lead the US. That's more money to you. That's more like you being able to be the big guy at UN meetings and stuff like that. And thirdly, your whole country as a whole just gets benefits because it's able to exploit its political connections for economic growth. What is the implication of this? Yes, you are scared of the Soviet Union to an extent and of communism to an extent, but only as a second order incentive when it comes to your own political power, because communism and the USSR are your biggest rival in the status quo. Notice this fear is not a fear of them militarily attacking you or you going to war, because you both have nukes. The war is over as soon as it happens. What is important is for you to maintain the most amount of influence and power within your own hands. Why is war unlikely? Three main reasons directly engaging with OO. Firstly, notice the point of mutual destruction. Both of these superpowers have fucking nuclear weapons. They're not going to enter wars with each other, because as soon as they do, and one drops a nuke on Moscow, everyone is just dead and the war is over. Both sides know this, and this is why they don't do it. Even if when they come close to doing it, they just make a deal and it's stopped. Secondly, notice the US believes that Soviet strength is falling. They have literally just beaten them in the biggest possible race, which is the space race. They have just landed on the moon. All USSR could do is get a man up in space. They're probably comparatively less strong than you, so even if there is a war, you believe you're going to win it. And yeah, that's about it. And third point of setup then about what the likely comparative is. I think we're going to use our fiat to classify the information that aliens exist to the maximum possible extent. We also don't believe that on the comparative, the USSR is ever going to come into contact with these aliens. Notice, the only way you come into contact with these aliens is by coming to the moon. If they could come to Earth, they would have already. Therefore, the only way the USSR comes into knowledge of their existence or into contact with them is literally by getting to the moon. They have zero incentive to do this, insofar as they have just lost the space race. The US came there first. There is no reason to spend billions and billions of whatever their currency was on that specifically. Our first pathway to victory then is simple. We're going to prove to you that this deal with the aliens were to take place is going to necessitate you to trade off a lot of your political power in concessions. First burden here. Why are concessions very likely going to happen in this deal? Firstly, aliens are giving you a lot. They're literally going to give you all of their technology and know-how, and literally the things that make them currently more powerful than you, just for you to beat an enemy they literally don't give a fuck about. Therefore, they're likely going to ask for a lot in return. Secondly, notice aliens know they have leverage. They know to an extent you want to beat the USSR, and you are scared of them and their capabilities. They're likely just going to extort from you even more by threatening they're going to ally with the USSR. What are these concessions likely going to be? I think it means trading off some of your resources for them to make their own army a lot stronger, for example, oil, or for example, imported metals. Secondly, I think it's just literally giving them power. That means literally giving them the capability to dictate the actions of your military, to dictate the governments of certain states, and to rule certain areas of life. Notice why this is specifically debate winning, because it engages with the main incentive of the US, which is prior to the fear of the USSR. They fear that they're going to lose political power. They fear that that aliens are going to extort from them, that they're going to lose the thing they care most about within this debate. This necessarily means, on weighing, that even if you buy the OG case, that it is likely that a war is going to happen, and that the US is not certain if it is going to win the war or not, they're always going to prioritize the fact that they have a certainty of maintaining the current level of political power now, rather than risk trading it off just for potential future benefits. I'll take that POI now from closing.
You have an assertion that cooperation is some zero game. At that time, US was preparing an umbrella that helps all countries at the assumption that helping others also helps you.
Okay, I'm sorry I didn't understand that POI, but I'm sure it's very smart. Okay then, on to our second pathway to victory. What does necessarily happen once you make an agreement with these specific aliens? And I want to attack OG on that specific point. Their stance is that they're going to maintain their alliance with aliens to be completely secret. I don't think this is possible. What you're likely going to do, insofar as you come into contact with these aliens, Firstly, just give them concessions which are going to reveal their existence to the public. For example, the fact that they're going to have administrative power within your state. Secondly, if you want to use the military power they're giving you, like for example, their spaceships, for example, their space guns, for example, their military personnel, you're necessarily going to have to expose that you're doing it. There is no deterrence from you having these weapons to the USSR if they don't know that you have them. Therefore, you need to expose this cooperation to the entire globe to access its benefits. Why is this necessarily bad? Because the existence of aliens is going to shake up belief in Jesus Christ. What do I mean? Christianity pushes a norm in which people are the chosen people of God and alone in the universe. Therefore, the existence of other alien species is directly contradictory to the doctrine of the Christian Bible. Why is this extremely bad to the US? Because its main way of persuading people to trust them over communism is by painting the Soviet Union as anti-Christian, as problematic towards religion. Therefore, the only reason why Americans trade off the benefits of communism, like getting more money as workers, is because they believe in Jesus. Insofar as this goes away, you lose your only way of maintaining power and persuading people outside of communism. For all these reasons,
I thank the speaker for that wonderful speech. A reminder to all speakers to please keep to 7 minutes and 15 seconds. And with that, I invite
Can you hear me?
yeah, you're good.
Okay, cool. Just give me a second. I'm setting up a timer. I'm going to use the Zoom timer because it's very convenient. Because you guys can see the time literally as it goes on. Okay, cool. Right. Three, two, one. Miscellaneous response. 1. They say the USSR will not find out if they classify. I'm sorry, this is fucking stupid. The USSR, it is as a assertion that the USSR didn't win the space race. They had fucking radio telescopes. They had Sputnik on the fucking satellites. They had they had satellites that were literally spying across the United States. It is absolutely atrociously to be believed that they would suddenly not find out fucking alien frequencies. This is an absolutely stupid claim. Let's deal with their actual argument. They say, oh, the aliens are going to force you to reveal it, and then they will say this will affect Christians because, oh no, they will see Jesus is bad. I just want to say this is one hell of an Alex Jones argument. Here is why the aliens will not need to do anything. Firstly, the moon is a barren, irradiated rock, and Earth is a very, very important resource. Like, the only reason that they would have approached any actor is because of the fact that they probably wanted to do something in Earth. So, obviously, the United States still has some level of leverage here, because obviously it's a two-way street of needing to have diplomatic incentives. Secondly, the United States, it's literally conceded in the naval slide that they are not capable of conquering Earth. They have no ability to want to incentivize coercive structure, because if they did want to do so, then they would probably do what OO did, but the fact that they didn't explain to you why they're likely going to maintain a level of power, etc. I just don't understand as to why this is likely going to be the case. Thirdly, it's just incredibly unlikely that the aliens will want to force massive destabilizing concessions, because it risks collapsing the deal that they want to be able to integrate it in the Earth. I just don't think it makes sense in the first place. Okay, that deals with their weird cases. Let's talk about interests. The strategic implication of this specific argument is to prove why, even if you believe that a war will not happen or that they don't care about the war, it is one, empirically a lie that the US has won the Cold War at this point. Like, just not a lie. Here is why that shit is just a fucking lie. Firstly, the United States did not give a shit about any form of boundaries in order to defeat communism. It did Operation Paperclip, where it literally recruited Nazi scientists to build missile programs. Operation Ajax, where the CIA overthrew a democratically elected prime minister in Iran simply because he nationalized the oil industry and feared alignment with Soviets. The United States is willing to assassinate anyone just to be able to get its own benefits in order to make sure that communism fails. At this point in time, even when the space race had won, it was already right after the Cuban Missile fucking crisis. There is no reason for me to believe that they would suddenly go, oh yeah, let's chill down, we've already got the space race won, guys. No, it's already hiked, because it is obviously when around the time when the Vietnam War is going on. Secondly, the United States is willing to provide funding and dictators to one of the most brutal brutal dictators in the earth. They literally assisted in so many assassinations of a variety of many like developing countries in order to make sure that they got their interests. Thirdly, the United States does not care about protecting its own citizens. Fucking Project MK Ultra, because they were scared of Soviets' rumors of brainwashing, they literally experimented LSD on its own citizens. Finally, we have to understand that this was at the height of the Eisenhower's domino theory, where in Asia, if one country falls to communism, then everything fell at place whilst the space race was going on. It is incredibly unlikely why the United States would suddenly just go, oh yeah, I'm fine, I'm just going to do all this good stuff and classify because I'm happy already. Why was the United States very paranoid? Firstly, the trauma of World War II and the trauma of knowing they would be nuked in within 30 minutes because the Soviets had ICBMs, meant to say that they would have likely wanted to weaponize because they need to be able to do it to make sure the Soviets don't go to them first. Second, they viewed the communists as an existential threat. Remember, Marxist-Leninism literally called for the violent global overthrow of capitalist societies. They did not want to coexist. The US government took this literally. Thirdly, and this is very important, the United States had one of the poorest intelligence on actual Soviet capabilities. It literally didn't know when Sputnik launched in 1957, they thought that the Soviets had already had a leg up on being able to spy on the United States. They didn't even know how many missiles they were producing because they just weren't able to breach the KGB and have full information. But also, the Soviets were winning in the information war. Soviet spies literally infiltrated the Manhattan Project, America's most secure laboratory, to trigger the Red Scare. It triggered a domestic sense of fear where your friend next to you, your neighborhood, could be a commie scum spy who could report you to the fucking KGB or something like that. Why does this win the debate immediately? If the aliens are risky and unpredictable, if it is about political power and sovereignty, no risk is greater than the Soviet Union. The United States is already willing to risk global nuclear war, i.e. Columbian crisis, is already willing to sponsor massacres and experiment on its own citizens. But finally, the US has no choice at this point in time. If they don't monopolize the aliens, the KGB will, given that I've proven that they're likely going to discover them inevitably. Let's win on security, but before that, CO.
No.
None? Okay, I'm gonna go on. I want to win security. What did US lose on? What was the United States lacking in security at this point? Firstly, obviously nukes. I think this is just empirically true. You were obviously very scared of the fact. Their response to us is, oh, mutually assured destruction. That's not an actual winning response. The reason why it's not an actual winning response is because the nukes were there. But here's the actual response to that response. The United States had no defensive systems against the thousands of nuclear weapons that the Soviets had. They were literally praying to God that one day Khrushchev would I gave you a chance, no more. So that the Soviet premier was rational enough to not pull the trigger. Secondly, as I explained, the United States was obviously forced to invest economically hugely into military buildup. It was forced to pour millions of dollars into Vietnam and Korea, pour billions more into the space race just to be able to maintain the illusion of, oh, we are winning the space race. Why do we win on security? Firstly, obviously we just win on the gamble of mutually assured destruction. We make sure mutually assured destruction isn't even a thing anymore. It is a certainty that you will win because you have all the defense mechanisms in order to protect your arsenal. Second, you fix the information asymmetry war. You'll be able to be fixing counterintelligence, where you finally find out where all the fucking KGB spies in the domestic areas are. You completely eliminate the risk of surprise attacks, and you're able to make sure that you don't escalate due to false alarms, which means that you actually have, which means that everything in the secretary, like the strategic comms, all the bullshit United States government faces would likely just be far off better. Finally, I'm going to explain why you get better levels of innovation. Why would the United States lagging in innovation at this point in time? Firstly, the USSR and the United States were equal in terms of scientific innovation right now. Every time the United States makes a breakthrough, Soviet espionage manages to sum it up, make it equal within months. Secondly, capital. To reach the next frontier of space, it requires huge money in order to be able to spend huge money of GDP just to go into NASA and DARPA, just to be able to win against the Soviets. Finally, scientific innovation is slow because it is bottlenecked by human capital and what your technology is at the time. What now you get is the ability to immediately fix all of the problems that happened because of the fact that you lack technology. One, the ability to reverse engineer huge amounts of alien technology to then fix R&D and reduce levels of spending because you don't need to invest into finding new things because the technology is right there. Second, it's just civilian economic booms. Remember, the space race gave us microchips, satellite telecoms, and advanced polymers. Imagine what we could get if fucking Star Wars hyperspace technology shit, use your imagination. But finally, we just fixed the human capital problem, which is to say that currently humans are bottlenecked because of the fact we are very limited in our brains and thinking. Even the best teams of scientists at the point in the 1940s were often very limited. Cooperation with alien technology was already fine. The final thing I want to do is preempt any possible argument on losing your sovereignty. There is a risk that you lose your sovereignty, but that's just a risk. What is certain is the fact that you get so much benefit of winning what the United States needed at this specific point in the Cold War. And for all these reasons and more, MMU takes the ESL final.
I think that speaker for that fine speech, be alone.
America wasn't afraid of the communists because they thought the USSR would conquer the US. Rather, because they feared the USSR would take over the political world and become politically much stronger than the US. On OG, this certainly happens. It's just not the USSR, it's the aliens opposed. Firstly, on concessions, we give you a simple claim. Aliens give the US tech. In return, the US needs to give concessions. Notice aliens want these concessions because that's the sole reason they made the deal, because they were profit seeking. They wanted something in return. And the concessions need to be great. They're not minor. Why? A, you're afraid of them. They have the stronger military power. You don't know for a fact they can't conquer the world. Even if they can't conquer the world, you don't know that they can't conquer you. You're afraid of them. You give them concessions. B, as OG characterizes, by their own definition, US is desperate in that situation. And lastly, the aliens have option, the US doesn't. The aliens can leverage the fact that they can go to other nations, such as the USSR, against the US. That's why the US needs to give great concessions in order for the aliens not to flee otherwise. Why are these concessions then horrible? What do they likely look like? A, they look like taking away your resources. For example, maybe your machinery, maybe your oil, all of these things which your economy runs on. It looks like maybe even taking away your sovereignty. Like you cannot make your own decisions. You cannot go against certain nations. For example, you cannot go to a proxy war with a nation that aliens have interest and all these things. You need to prioritize them. Why is this point independently debate winning? A, uncertainty. It's certain that the aliens made a deal for a reason, that the reason is to grab concessions out of you. And also on scale, given the metric that the OG gives you, why America wants to fight Soviets, the way it does that is by having the best economy in the world, so it turns away countries from the Soviet Union. It gives them benefits for joining them. They cannot do that if their economy is worse. They cannot do that if the aliens are dictating something else. These concessions are debate winning independently. Let's talk about security then. I think there are two broad responses here. Firstly, security isn't that much better on opening government. Notice per the info slide, these aliens cannot conquer the world. This means they don't have Star Wars technology. Maybe they have some nuclear capacity that's greater than us. We concede that, but we don't see the large delta insofar as they cannot conquer us. Especially, we don't see any structural analysis why they have the specific technology the US needs. Why it's not just better nukes that we don't need. Why it's specific defense technology, which I don't see why aliens would have defense technologies. I don't know who they're defending against. Furthermore, you cannot use the technology willy-nilly if per open government framing you don't want it to be found out. Secondly, even if they have better security isn't an important point, because security is only important insofar as there's a risk of war. Why does the US think that the war is unlikely? A, they have optimism bias. They won the space race. They're beating the Soviets. They don't think the war is unlikely. B, we have mutual assured destruction. We have 2,000 nuclear weaponry. The USSR is unlikely to attack insofar as they all don't want to die. Notice this mechanism is the symmetric on both sides of the house. I don't see why they have a greater defense. But lastly, the Soviets are weakening, right? You won the space race. You're beating them economically. Their people are hungry and suffering. Why do we then wash out this point on likelihood, right? You take the certain benefits that you lose concessions, your economy gets worse, rather than this the very speculative impacts of you being somewhat better at a war that we don't see why to pan out. But lastly, we can flip this point, right? I think security is worse on their side of house. Insofar as the USSR is now much more scared of the US because US has greater technology, so USSR is likely to want to spy on them. It's likely to want to try to steal the technology. All of this raises tension and makes the likelihood of war and of likelihood of paranoid USSR leaders are likelier to attack.
I think security is clear. Then on religion, this isn't a meme case. Don't play. Notice this isn't reliant on whether or not people actually switch and don't become religious. It's not reliant on whether or not this information becomes public later on. It's just reliant on the fact that the US doesn't want to be the one that's telling this information to the public. Why does this information need to be public if a deal is to be made? This is the only way to show you have like power. Insofar as you don't do this, you just lose out on concessions, but you don't actually like have a bigger dick than the USSR. But B, I think aliens will want the presence. They will want the world to be known because they want the US to be in a better position, so the US can become powerful. And lastly, you need to just portray this sort of strength per OG characteristics. And notice aliens are necessarily against like the religion is necessarily against aliens, because then it shows that that we the people aren't the chosen by the God. Obviously, there's someone else. Why does the US think this is so important and ready to risk everything? Because the religion was crucial in the fight against communism, right? It was the main weapon that rallied the US people. US people didn't actually oppose communism as an ideology. They opposed the fact that the USSR was greatly anti-religion. Why do you need to rally your people against communism? Because you need to like explain why you go to proxy wars. You need to explain why you invest so much money into war. All of these things only hurt your public, but the only reason they're willing to do that is to fight for God. Before I go to the instability point, POI.
So if you don't do this, the Russians will find them first because they have the technology. So all the benefits are gone.
I'll go on to that. Why do the Russians? So this is why religion point is so important. It's the main weapon the US has to rally their people against communism. Obviously, these are the most important actors because you need to be legitimized by your own people. Why this isn't found out on a comparative? These aliens live on the moon. This USSR never went to the moon. It's not just enough for you to have satellites, because you need to actually go with them and be proximate in order to communicate. The aliens never approached us. It was obvious to approach them first. And the USA hid a bunch of things from the Soviet, like the open government pointed out. But notice our religion point and our concessions point are both not reliant on the Soviets actually gaining this gaining this power. I think it's fine, even if they do find out, we can bite the bullet. Lastly, then onto the CJ case and their POIs about helping others. I don't think helping others is important to US insofar as you're reliant on aliens telling you what to do. The reason USA helped others so that other countries are reliant on the USA, but insofar as the USA is now reliant on aliens, this doesn't help them that much. And also the delta is not great because everyone was already reliant on the USA to a large degree. For all these reasons,
I thank the speaker for their wonderful speech. And to continue with the bottom half of the debate, happy to call upon the member of government.
Am I audible?
You're good to.
Okay. POIs in the chat, please. I will take you. I promise. Hand to God or whatever. Okay. There's going to wait. Sorry. I didn't do the timer. Sorry. There's going to be two cases in my speech. First of all, why the impact of refusing the offer is very severe and why we have a limited window of opportunity that we should actually take right now. And second, why the contract will simply be good responding to a lot of mechanism internally. First, like a little bit of framing, right? I think that OG main focuses about how the USSR is very scary and all of that. First, we don't think it actually matters that much how much we are against the USSR. If the US say they want, they only listen to themselves anyway, right? We think that also it's unclear how much better the technology of like the defense is of the aliens. We think that they don't get any impact of that from OG, and we think that we're talking about this motion, we're talking about contemporary, i.e. to the 1960s or whatever. I mean that we're not really sure what is stronger than like nuclear weapons, which already have a huge deterrence on them. And second, I think that it's just very short term, right? I think that like we know from history the USSR fell and US won everything. So we think that maybe OG is right about what the US is more likely to do, but it's not. The debate is not what is more likely. The debate is what they should do much more. How exactly does the impact of refusing the offers look like? I think that aliens are somewhat human because they can understand us. We have common things with them. They probably have some common interests with us, like language, like the ability to make a deal. What happens if we actually refuse? First, we think that the aliens will feel very disrespected, right? It looks like they know that they're stronger than us. We know that they're stronger than us, but we still don't really consider them that strong, right? We feel like we can take them on in a fight. We feel like we're very arrogant. We think that they will think that we are not afraid of them, that we don't really respect them, because they came up to us and told us to make a deal with them, and we just blatantly refused, right? I think that they see that we don't really listen to them. This is also very likely because we'll likely have to explain to them why we're refusing their deal, meaning that we're likely have to say to them, we don't really trust you. We think that you're going to like ruin Christians' lives or whatever, or says. I think that because of all of that, we have the impact of just losing the advantage of finding them first, right? OG says it in POI and don't analyze it for shit, but we think that it's simply more likely that the aliens that do want some resources from Earth that they don't have, like fish or more water or whatever, that they will simply go to another country, i.e. mainly the USSR at that point, but also any other country, just mainly the USSR, because they know probably that there are main like enemies and things like that, and they are also very, very strong, meaning we simply lose the opportunity of getting all this technology first, right? I think that if OG want to keep the USSR at bay and they want the short-term impact, this is where it actually happens at first, right? Because it doesn't rely on like speculative better deterrence or better technology. It's simply telling you that it's very likely that the aliens will go and they will go to the USSR and give them their technology and make deals with them, right? I think that when we are the first, when we can actually make sure that the aliens think whatever we want them to think, this is where we have a limited window of opportunity that will simply have a disappear. Second, we think that the aliens are much less cooperate with us in the future, right? This means that like we lose strategic placing. We think that already back then satellites and like space were considered good for defense strategies. Second, we think that we're losing a lot of resources like metals or minerals that are more common on the moon than they are on Earth, meaning that I like need them for defense or technology or in general. And third, we think that the US is strong because it either dominates or cooperates with basically every country on Earth. We cannot dominate them, so we must cooperate with them. This is where we get the more soft power that the US is actually interested in, not only back then, but also in the long term. This is where you get the impact of losing ground against other countries and against the USSR in particular, right? I think that the aliens will likely just communicate with other countries. We think that will like the aliens that, as OO pointed out, want some resources will simply go and take those resources and make deals with another country. This is where we simply have much less ability to cooperate them and to get their technology in the future. And third, we simply think that we have less like negotiating power in the future, right? I think that when we sign contracts, we're likely to make sure that both sides kind of lose a little bit, right? It means that the aliens don't have that much power over us. We can make sure that we have terms that are beneficial to us. On the chat, I think that the comparative, the aliens get stronger and they have more capacity to extract more resources from us, to extract like more abuse from us, because they think that we don't cooperate them, because they have no incentive to cooperate with us, and because there is no like legal binding thing that makes them think that we actually need to communicate with them. I think that the contract will be good. First, because we think that like the aliens don't really have that much better technology on us, because otherwise they would have come to Earth, they would have taken the resources themselves. There's a reason they asked for a contract instead of just outright war. And second, I think that like the aliens probably don't want to go to war because they don't want to lose their alien lives. I think that all of that will make sure that they are good chance for the US. First, on the resources, right? We have a lot of like resources that we can give them, and then we not only exchange some resources for us too, but also like the resources that they will take will probably go into improving their technology, which again, as established, we already benefit from too, right? We think that also we have much more power over them because we have resources that they don't have at all. Everything that the moon has, the Earth has, is at least somewhat, meaning that they are the ones that have something that they can't get otherwise. And we have much more experience negotiating, because who would aliens do negotiations with if they're all one big parent, like we have experience with like other countries. Before I continue further stuff,
If the aliens wanted to approach us, they would do so a long time ago because they have the technology. It's likely that we found them, so it's not a problem if we refuse the contract, and also they likely won't go and contact the Soviets.
Why would they not contact the Soviets? I feel like I gave you enough analysis on that. The rest Army will do. I think that because of we think that also the aliens will likely want at least some political influence on Earth, which mainly happens through the US in that time in general, meaning that we simply have much more power to like introduce them to the other countries and to make sure they get resources from whatever, meaning that we do have a lot of power, right? And this is where we can actually make sure that the aliens are not against us, and to make sure that the terms that we're establishing for years to come, maybe even more than when the USSR actually falls, we make sure that the contracts are actually good, right? And I think that this proves to you a huge burden on government bench about why we need this contract and it's mutually exclusive. And second, why the contract will be done well, and it's making government cases less susceptible to OO's attacks about how the contract will be exploited and the humans will suffer because of it. Because of all of that, CG.
I thank DMG for the wonderful speech, inviting the.
Hey guys, am I audible and visible?
Yes.
Okay, amazing. Before starting my speech, just some very quick thank yous. This is the second time some team from Portugal is at an ESL final this year. Since we haven't been in ESL finals for ages before that, I think it's honestly amazing, or amaze to continue with the space reference, to be able to do it. So thanks to everyone in Portugal, thanks to my debate society, but a special thank you to my debate partner and life partner, Marilia. I love you. Okay, starting my speech in the next word. When Enrico Fermi first asked the question, where is everyone, to show the apparent paradox between the vastness of the universe and the lack of contact with aliens, I suspect he was not talking about military agreements with them. Because if there's one thing that history of humanity has proved to us, is that the weaker parts of the agreement always gets fucked. Let's start with an assumption that no one justified in this debate, and I think is severely misguided. Why is it likely that this is not the only alien civilization in the universe? First, there are three kinds of solutions to the Fermi paradox. Either they don't exist, they exist and they are not here. Both of these solutions are clearly not the debate we are having right now, but we are talking about they exist and they are here. This means that if one alien society exists, is much more likely that there are more alien societies capable of existing and reaching us. Why? For two reasons. First, the only reason for which there is no other society is if there is some kind of great filter that cuts this society in the beginning of their developmental process. If we are the only ones that have survived this, it's likely that there isn't another one. But if two of them have survived and are in the same vicinity of the universe, it is much more likely that there's a vastness of other civilizations out there. But secondly, if travel between the stars is possible, i.e. they literally did it, it's much more likely that other civilizations are able to do it and have done it in the past. This means that it's much more likely that there are going to be other civilizations which no one except for us actually talks about. But secondly, notice that if you are doing a mutual defense pact, you only do it because there is some kind of threat. The aliens only have the incentives to do mutual defense pacts if they are in some kind of aggression or if they need to be defended from anyone. This leads me to my second point, which is that you are probably getting in a war that you are not aware of. Two possibilities. First, these aliens have some kind of war at their own planet. This is very likely because if they are away from their home planet, they are probably there because they are refugees, because they are moving away from them. This means that it's more likely that they need this mutual pact to defend themselves against any other kind of group or any other kind of civilization, that as they is much more stronger than the United States or Earth. But secondly, notice that it's probably that they have encountered other civilizations with which they have beef. As I've proved to you earlier, it's much more likely that there are more civilizations, and as human history proves us, it's so likely that civilizations that are different and have different backgrounds, and more different backgrounds than the ones that we have at Earth, are much more likely to be in conflict, to be in dispute. This means that the Earth becomes a dispute field, and the United States know this because they can do this kind of calculus that we are doing right now. This means that it is much more likely than one, either they enter into disputes, the other alien civilization enters with dispute with the US directly, which means that they are now turning their attention from the war that they are trying to win and now needing to help their partners winning a war they were not part of before, or some other civilization discovers that it is happening and is more likely to actually contact the USSR and actually help the USSR, which means that now the war is harder to fight, because if the aliens were not able to win this war, we are probably not able to win it too. The bottom line of this argument is that you are probably being distracted from the war that you are currently trying to win. This means that you need that you have less resources for this war, that you have less agents for this war, that you are less capable of actually winning the war with the Soviet Union, even with external help. But thirdly, notice that this is a big risk of escalation of the Cold War. One, because it is more likely that the Soviet Union becomes aware of this. First, because you are probably just going to say it because you want to boast about the fucking things that you are doing that have never been done by humanity. This is why they were trying to go to the moon. They were trying to prove that they were the ones capable of going there, not just because this is some military strategy goal that they were able to accomplish. This means that you are much more likely to say, look, I found aliens like me, I'm clearly the superior part of Earth. But secondly, it's likely that you sleep, that someone tells this thing in a speech or in a letter or whatever, because they are full of stress. But lastly, it's likely there are some kind of spies or traitors or torture that makes the Soviet Union likely to know this. This means that the Soviet Union is, one, likely to try to get any kind of alien ally from the other opposition to this alien civilization, as I was telling you, which means that they are probably going to be much better and have a stronger capacity to actually negotiate with this partner because they are the ones proposing the agreements. But secondly, they probably perceive you as a bigger threat because the US is going to be helped by a bigger civilization, which means that they can probably start using the Tsar bomb and things like that on you, escalating the Cold War. Even if they don't become aware, it is likely that they suspect, because of rumors, because of the science and weapons of the United States improving, which means that you are probably going to try to have that into account and therefore escalate the things. You are probably also getting to the moon. But lastly, let's talk about asymmetries of power. No mutual agreement is equal between two parts. Think about the UK and Portugal pacts. The UK got rich, Portugal got poor. Aliens are, one, more advanced than you. This means that they can probably give you a phone or something that does not really matter for you, while they are asking you to give things that you yet don't know the value of. The moon has less resources than Earth has. The moon does not have oil. The moon does not have rare minerals that you yet don't know the value of at that time, but will become important for you later. This means that they are much more likely to be able to steal you of your resources, to steal you of your capacity to actually build things and win the war, because they are going to be the superior nation inside of these asymmetry pacts. But if anyone tells us, oh, but you have these resources, therefore you have more capacity to bargain with them. Guys, colonialism was a thing. Africa, Asia, South America had resources. They still lost those wars. What we are trying to prove to you is that it is much more likely that the US get fucked in the Cold War if they try to do a pact with the aliens.
Thank the speaker for that speech. A reminder to speakers suggesting POIs is an important part of the game. With that, happy to confront the government with.
Okay, sorry. שמעו אותך מכאן. טוב. Okay. Okay. I'm starting in 3, 2, 1. OG has a problem in this debate because OG explained to you good why the US can have a lot to gain from the aliens, but they only analyze one side of the comparative. Both oppositions attack them and tell them that also there are huge costs. OG have very few analyses on explaining why a benefit justifies the costs. And this is where Mika's analysis comes into play. Mika's analysis explains to you why the cost of the agreement is going to be worth it. But first of all, I want to rebut CO's case about war with other aliens. We think it is not likely that we are going to enter into war with new aliens because the following reason. The second closest planet to Earth aside from Moon is Mars. And note that the current aliens don't have enough technological advancement to conquer Earth, even though they are on Moon, meaning that they cannot carry heavy tanks and heavy weapons from Moon to Earth. This means that they also much less carry weapons from Moon to Mars or third planet. This means that the conquering or having an actual physical war between Mars or further and the Moon is extremely not likely. Now, maybe CG will say, okay, maybe there is third alien plan that do have this advantage that can conquer from Mars to Moon. But if these third aliens that exist on Mars are so strong that they can conquer Moon from Mars, then we as humans are nothing against them because we as humans are even weaker than the aliens on Moon. So if there are new aliens on Mars that are stronger than the aliens on Moon, they are much stronger than the humans and aliens on Moon combined, meaning that the aliens on Moon in this case won't have real advantage of cooperating with the humans. The humans are not their saviors, meaning that it's much more likely that they want simply economic cooperation, which I'll explain. Now let's weigh over OG. As I said, OG don't explain the other side of the cost. Why? Mika explains to you that the cost is worth it. First of all, Mika explains to you that if the US does not cooperate, the flip side is the aliens going to the USSR. This means that even if the US makes some concessions, the comparative is much worse. The comparative is giving resources to a lot of more resources to the USSR, meaning that the USSR can now build more industrial complex, meaning that they can supply the other countries that they with their side much more, meaning that the US is going to have less allies, meaning that they can have less free trade routes and have less economic advantage and all of that. It also means that in their side, the USSR is much more likely to be aggressive because they explained that the USSR are being weakened, meaning that they have more to lose and more to lose, therefore they fight at all cost. But this is the first extension. The second extension says that the deal is actually going to be good for the US. And here I want to rebut OO and explain why actually we are going to have good deal. First of all, I argue that the aliens do have a lot to benefit from the US. What this looks like. First of all, in Earth, we have unique chemical resources and we have knowledge on these resources. These chemical resources are important for things like building chemical industries, maybe some medicine, maybe some fertilizers, and a lot of chemical reactions that we can research also on Earth. The aliens do not have. The US can give them this information. Also, we can give them space. The Earth is 6 times larger than Moon. Therefore, they can build stuff on Earth and build industries. Also, the Earth has more gravity, meaning that some of the physical experiments can happen only on Earth, meaning that you can make your scientific experiments much more on Earth. Also, you can take satellites to revolve around the Earth. If you have to make some radio or some television or some internet on Moon, you can have this space for satellites on Earth. It's not so we do have a lot to give them. The aliens do prefer the US because going to the USSR is extra hassle. It will make the US go against the Moon and enter some conflict. So the aliens prefer the easy option of going to the US. Therefore, they are willing to make some concessions also on their side. But also, I think this is the strongest rebuttal against OO. OO have an assertion that the cooperation is some zero game. That is, if they assert that if aliens take resources from the US, then the US will have less resources. This is actually the opposite, because this is going to be a win-win agreement. What this looks like. First of all, let's talk about oil. Let's go with OO's argument that the aliens will take oil from the US. The US have a lot of unextracted oil resources at that time, and because of that, they were like facing stress from Arab countries who made a cartel on oil. But the US did not have enough technology to extract the existing oil in their land. Then the alien can come and tell to the US, I will give you technology on how to extract stuff. And this means that you yourself get more oil, but also give more oil to the aliens. And then you face the cartel of the Arab countries. Second thing about growing food. Before I continue, I'll take a second.
Do you believe in aliens, and have you seen Star Wars?
I don't know. It's just related. Sorry. Okay. Now the second rebuttal about growing food. Once people have an idea that if you get because you had limited land, you can have like a limited amount of food, and this is some zero game. If you give some free food, therefore you have less food. But I think the aliens have more technology on making agriculture much more advanced. Think how exponential advancing we made from the 1960s to now on the amount of food we can grow on a limited amount of land. If this technology were to be given to the US in 1960s, the amount of economic advantage to the US would be much, much stronger in this time. The aliens are likely to have such technology because they have experience in making energy or some kind of food, I don't know what, in moon where the climate is harder and it's harder to grow food there. If they are able to create their energy on moon, therefore they have much more technology to allow us to make even more food. So what's the bottom line here? OO assert that that aliens only can get concession, and this only makes the US weaker. It's actually the opposite. We can find a win-win situation where the aliens trade with the US, both sides benefit and both sides become stronger. The weighing above OG is that this is much more long-term. That is, this not only works on the current war with the USSR, but it puts the US for a huge leap forward in technology, a huge leap forward in economics, and this also explains the cost analysis of why the agreement is worth the cost. Please, our side.
I thank the government whip for that wonderful speech. And to wrap up the debate with the final speech, Op Whip, you're here.
Thank you so much. While I'm preparing all my papers, I'm just gonna reinforce the little cute speech that my partner did. My love, I also love you. But thank you for our Portuguese circuit that brought us here once again for you and for the first time for me, and for all the international people that helped us, Petar and Marta and everyone else. Like, you are always going to be with us. Thank you so much. I'm going to start in my first word. And now I'm going to show you how we're going to win this debate in three metrics: security, costs, and not escalating the war and actually being able to win it. Well, first, we win in security because we're not exposing ourselves and not like weakening ourselves. Some answers to CG. Well, first they say that there is no more aliens and we are here alone. But you are the guys talking about like other alien allies, so I thought you would agree with us. But sure, you don't want to agree with us, fine. They don't need to be on Mars. They can be anywhere. If they can get through here, because this civilization don't need to be born in the moon, they just live in the moon. So if they can get here, or if they live here, they can come from literally anywhere. They have spaceships. They don't have to fight with tanks and everything like that. Have you seen Star Wars? But also, I know my partner seems like a crazy guy talking about aliens, like the History Channel one, but that's because we don't believe in aliens as a society right now. But the problem is, in this specific debate, aliens do exist. And he explained that the likelihood of one alien civilization existing makes that the likelihood of other civilizations also existing. And actually, other civilizations being at war with this prior alien civilization that we met, just because they have been already existing and they can be already fighting because they're probably like stronger alien civilizations. But I don't need you guys to believe in me that other aliens exist. I just need you guys to understand that if the United States meets an alien, they have the perception that other aliens might exist and there might be other wars to fight, and this might go into their calculus of why not align with them. That also comes in the answer of why the Soviet Union might not accept you. But first of all, let's talk about the CG case, because the good part of the CG case is derivative of OG, so I can start answering both. As you said, alien allies exist, then alien enemies might also exist. They also might be stronger, and they also probably are already in war. Because if they are trying to do a defense, it's because they are trying to defend themselves from someone, even if it is from you. That doesn't really make sense because they see that you're weaker than them, so they're trying to defend themselves from someone else. And you, some help, because as you said, there's resources and everything, but you're not like the military partner that's gonna defend them. They're trying to defend them from someone that is stronger than them. And this someone can, again, ally with the Soviet Union. So I don't know if you really want to risk to ally with the weak aliens where the Soviet Union can ally with a stronger one. But sure. Also, the other countries are not relevant here. I agree that we are talking about the possibility of these aliens uniting with the Soviet Union or not uniting the Soviet Union. If the Soviet Union would not unite with them. First of all, because of U.S. propaganda. If the U.S. is the first one to meet with them, they're gonna sell that to the Soviet Union, that to the aliens. The Soviet Union is like the villain. They are not nice. They are weak. Everything. So it's probably not very much in their interest. But even if it is, and these aliens like reach the Soviet Union, or when the Soviet Union get to the moon, which is something that we deal with and our opening house doesn't, even when the Soviet Union gets to the moon, they are purists. They are not going to unite with the aliens because the aliens are not communists, you know. Also, they are going to do the same calculus that we did, and with the difference that like they might not know that they might know that we have been there already and we denied this treaty. This is gonna make them think like, why are they uniting this? Why are they not accepting this? They could have beaten us with this. If they didn't accept, there is a reason. And it's even strategic for the aliens to tell them that, because it don't seem like very persuasive to say, oh, I tried to unite with the other guy, but they didn't want to. I'll be there in a second. But also, if they unite, if they're stupid, it's fine. You have more information about these aliens than the URSS had, and you can also like look for the other strong aliens. Going on OG very quickly, they don't really work, but even if you believe that they do, they work in the very short terms. They don't analyze what's the cost to maintain this type of an alliance, why you're costing yourself the war that you're fighting in, and some other war that you might get into, but also, you're putting yourself at risking your security. So on the security metric, I prefer to stay hide and not be known by other aliens and other things. But also because you're weakening yourself on this partnership relationship where you are the weaker one. You say that you're certain to win. You should do it because you're certain to win. No, you're not certain to win, because again, there might be other scenarios where there is other ways of the Soviet Union beating you, even if it is on other aliens like helping them or uniting with them or whatever. But also, like, just because you can get so much weaker because of this alliance, because this alliance is predatory, because you're the weak one, you're the resources one, that you might not even be able to beat the URS after all. Resources are not a leverage. You try to say that's a leverage. Have you looked to Africa or the global south at any point? Resource, unfortunately, is not a leverage. You say you're going to have control of this relationship. No, you're not. This is colonialism. You're the weak wing. You're going to break. This is not going to be maintained a secret. I made that POI. It's impossible. The Cold War is basically my dick is bigger than yours battle. They're going to say something about it. They cannot brag and showcase what they are doing great without telling that something is happening, and they can enjoy the benefits of it if it's secret. I will accept opening.
If the Republic wanted to use the dark side to win against the separatists, they would. If the United States would do anything like literally invade more foreign countries, they would do this regardless of any alien shenanigans.
No, not necessarily. Like, yeah, if the aliens wanted to invade, they would have invaded. Sure, but they didn't invade because they didn't have any incentive to. But now you have someone that knows that you exist and didn't want to unite with you. So I think it's more likely that they can do something right now because the things change. The fact that they had interaction with the United States changed everything. Just a quick distancing from an opening. First of all, we are the only ones that engage with the scenarios that the governments are proposing to this debate. We engage with the fact that the URSS might not stop the war and might go to the moon and might know these aliens and other aliens and everything else. The CG is the one that says that the strongest case that beat OOs, it's the sum zero case. Well, we are the one that proves that this contract is not a sum zero in the government side, but also deal with the problems that OO didn't for that. Also, they try to bring this Christian metric that they don't bring any relevance to. There's alien theology now, and basically like all security costs and not escalating the war, actually winning the war, win this debate. Thank you so much.